Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications.
Elias had left the substation site 3 hours earlier than the schedule dictated. The maintenance on the high-voltage transformers had been suspended due to a supply chain error regarding a specific ceramic insulator, and rather than wait in the trailer, listening to the rain hammer against the metal roof, he took the opportunity to head home. He drove with a specific, perhaps naive, visualization in his mind. He thought about the warmth of the house. He thought about Sylvia. At 38 years of age, Sylvia was a woman who seemed to be defying the aging process through sheer force of will and expensive skin care. He imagined she would be exhausted from her week, perhaps sitting on the couch with a glass of water, and that his early arrival might result in a quiet dinner. Just the two of them. Even if they ate in silence, even if they were too tired to speak, the proximity would be enough. He did not expect much from life anymore. A hot meal, a lack of noise, and the familiar scent of his own home were usually sufficient to reset his baseline for happiness. But the moment he turned the key in the lock, the resistance of the heavy oak door gave way to a wall of sound that did not belong there. He stepped inside, his work boots leaving a faint outline of mud on the pristine marble of the foyer. He realized immediately that this day would not end like the others. The living room was at capacity. There were people he barely recognized. Glasses being raised. Laughter that felt too sharp and too loud. And music that was far more refined and atmospheric than anything Sylvia usually listened to. Gold balloons were taped against the far wall, spelling out, "Congratulations, Sylvia." It was a celebration. Obviously. And apparently. The entire tri-state area had been notified. Except for her husband. Sylvia spotted him from across the room. She was wearing a dress he had never seen before. Something structured and severe. In a shade of emerald green that made her look formidable, rather than approachable. She approached him with a rehearsed hug. Her body stiff against his. It was a greeting designed for an audience. A gesture that said, "Stay calm. Do not embarrass me. I will explain later." "You're early," she said. Her voice tight. "Work was called off," Elias replied, feeling the grit of the construction site still clinging to his skin. He felt like a stain on a white tablecloth. "Go change," she whispered. A command. Masked as a suggestion. Quickly. Elias smiled out of courtesy. A mechanical lifting of the lips. He retreated upstairs, showered the day off his body, and dressed in clothes that felt too tight. When he returned downstairs, he tried to mingle. But he felt like a background character in the movie of his own life. His colleagues were not there. These were her people. Designers. Financial analysts. Consultants. Conversations revolved about market volatility, asset allocation, and retreats in Bali. One man in particular demanded attention. He was tall, with a posture that suggested he had never experienced back pain in his life. He wore a suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. He had a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for hours, until it reached the perfect level of disarming charm. Dr. Gideon Vance. Elias knew the name. Gideon was Sylvia's performance coach. Sylvia had mentioned him a few times in passing, always referring to him as the catalyst who was helping her unlock her maximum executive potential. Elias had assumed he was a gray-haired man in an office with a notepad. He was wrong. Gideon was younger than Elias expected. Perhaps 40. And he moved through Elias's living room with the ease of a predator who knows he is at the top of the food chain. Elias tried not to care. He grabbed a beer, realized everyone else was drinking vintage wine, and put the beer back. He switched to water. From the corner of the room, he watched. Between one conversation and another, Elias began to catalog the irregularities. Gideon did not just exist in the space, he occupied it. He touched the furniture with familiarity. He adjusted the volume on the sound system without asking. At one point, Elias watched as Gideon walked to the wine rack, a custom installation Elias had built with his own hands 2 years ago, and selected a bottle without hesitation. "Excellent choice," Gideon announced to the group, holding up the bottle. Sylvia has truly evolved in her appreciation for the bold, complex reds. A year ago, she would not have touched this. Elias froze. He stood near the kitchen island, his grip tightening on his water glass. Until recently, Sylvia had claimed she was allergic to tannins. She hated red wine. She drank only white, or champagne. Now, apparently, she had a refined palate. And who had taught her that? Elias stayed back, observing. The data points were accumulating. Gideon would often touch Sylvia's arm. A light tap near the elbow. A hand on the shoulder. Like someone subtly marking territory. It wasn't sexual. Not overtly. It was possessive. It was the touch of a sculptor. Admiring his creation, Sylvia smiled at him. But the smile was different. It was less spontaneous than the smiles Elias remembered from their early years. It was a high-performance smile. Measured. Optimal. That kind of smile had not been directed at Elias for a very long time. He tried to rationalize it. He told himself he was tired. He told himself he was simply insecure. Because he spent his days surrounded by concrete and steel, while she spent hers in glass towers. Maybe she was just happy. Maybe this success explained the distance. But something deeply bothered him. There was an invisible wall between them. They lived under the same roof, but they were operating in parallel dimensions. A small detail caught his eye. On the sideboard, near the piano, a book was lying face down. Elias approached it while the guests were distracted by a toast Gideon was proposing. He flipped the book over. The Architecture of Emotional Sovereignty, How to Redefine Your Relational Boundaries. Author, Dr. Gideon Vance. Elias had never seen this book in the house. Sylvia did not read self-help books. She read market reports and biographies of dead presidents. He opened the cover. There was an inscription in pen. For S. To breaking the chains that hold us back. You are ready to fly. And 41 of Vestival Tractas. When the guests finally began to disperse, Gideon stayed longer than necessary. He and Sylvia stood by the piano, laughing softly. They looked like teenagers sharing a private joke, excluding the rest of the world. When Gideon finally left, clutching his coat, Sylvia approached Elias. Thank you for being here, she said. Of course, Elias replied. He did not hide the flatness in his tone. She noticed. She frowned. A momentary crack in the mask. You look strange. I am just tired, he said. It was not entirely a lie. He went upstairs, leaving her to clean up the remnants of the party. He lay in bed, his head full of questions he did not want to ask. Because he was terrified of the answers. The scent of a perfume he did not recognize lingered on his pillow. For the first time in 12 years of marriage, Elias stared at the ceiling in the dark. Unable to sleep in his own house. Elias woke up before the alarm. The silence in the house was heavy. He ran his hand over the other side of the bed. The sheets were cold. Sylvia was already up. He dressed in his work clothes. Jeans. Flannel shirt. Steel-toed boots. Feeling like he was putting on armor. When he went downstairs, the smell of premium roast coffee filled the kitchen. He found his wife at the granite island, scrolling through her phone while drinking a green juice. She looked up. She smiled. It was a quick, mechanical contraction of facial muscles. How are you? She asked, her eyes returning to the screen. Slept little, Elias said. He poured himself a mug of black coffee. She seemed to avoid the topic of his insomnia. Instead, she launched into a monologue about the success of the previous night. She spoke about engagement metrics. About who had attended. About how people were already posting about it on social media. Elias sat down on a bar stool. He took a sip of the bitter liquid. He decided to stop dancing around the issue. Why the party, Sylvia? What exactly were we celebrating? Sylvia set her glass down. She straightened her posture. She answered in a tone that sounded like she was reading from a press release. I closed the merger and acquisition deal regarding the Transatlantic Logistics Fund. I have been structuring it for 9 months. The final valuation of the operation exceeded $2 billion. She paused, waiting for applause that did not come. My commission on the closing, she continued, was $5 million. She said it without excitement. She reported the number. 5 million, as if she were telling him the temperature outside was 60 degrees. There was no joy. No shared triumph. No, we did it, Elias. Just a cold, hard fact. 5 million, Elias repeated. He pretended not to be shocked. He sipped his coffee slowly. $5 million. She made fortunes like that, and spoke of them as if she had found loose change in the laundry. He thought, she says this like she is telling me she bought a new pair of shoes. But he showed nothing. Not shock, not discomfort. He chose silence. Because sometimes silence is the only shield a man has left, when he realizes he has lost his standing in his own home. Is that all? Elias asked. It is a significant milestone, she said defensively. Was Gideon part of the negotiation team? Sylvia blinked. No. Why would he be? He is a coach. He seemed very involved last night. Very proud. He has been essential in the past few months, Sylvia said, staring at her empty glass. He helped me stay focused. He taught me how to handle pressure. He helped me make strategic decisions about where to invest my energy. Strategic decisions, Elias echoed. Is that what we call it? Gideon is a serious professional. He is highly respected. She stood up, took her plate to the sink, and rinsed it with aggressive precision. She turned back to him. Why are you being suspicious? You are acting paranoid. I am not paranoid, Elias said calmly. I just felt out of place. Like I did not belong in that room. Like everything familiar has been replaced. Things change, Elias, she said, her voice dropping to a condescending pitch. I am in a phase of growth. Expansion. Sometimes this causes friction. For those close to me who are not on the same trajectory. Elias listened. Trying to digest the insult wrapped in corporate buzzwords, those who are not on the same trajectory. She meant him. He was the anchor dragging on the seabed, while she tried to sail. That woman in front of him was the same one he had met in university. But she had been remodeled. It was as if someone had tampered with her essence. And placed a veneer of gold over it. He went to work that day with a headache that pounded behind his eyes. He tried to focus on the grid schematics, the load-bearing calculations, the safety reports. But the image of Sylvia next to Gideon kept interfering. The way they stood. The proximity. When he came home at the end of the day, she was not there. There was a note on the counter saying she had a debriefing dinner with some investors, and would be late. Elias grabbed the remote, turned on the television, and watched the news without hearing a word. He walked to the shelf where he had seen the book the night before. The Architecture of Emotional Sovereignty. He read the back cover. Phrases jumped out at him. Letting go of historic ties. Breaking old patterns. Restarting with courage. You owe nothing to your past self. He closed the book. And put it back exactly as he found it. That night, he made a decision. He opened his laptop and accepted the offer from the Energy Consortium in Wyoming. It was a temporary contract. 6 months. Overseeing the installation of wind turbines in a desolate, freezing valley. The pay was high. The conditions were miserable. And it was 2,000 miles away. He had refused it twice before. Because he did not want to leave Sylvia. Now, he saw no reason to stay. He informed Sylvia via text message the next morning, taking the Wyoming job. Leaving in 3 days. She replied 4 hours later. Okay. Safe travels. No phone call. No question of why. Just acceptance. 2 days later, while packing his suitcase, Elias found an old photograph tucked in a drawer. It was from their honeymoon, 10 years ago. They were hiking in the Alps. Soaked from rain. Eating cheap sandwiches. Laughing. He looked at the photo for a long minute. Then, he put it in a folder, and placed it at the bottom of his suitcase. At the departure, there was no scene. Sylvia was heading out for her Pilates session. She waved from the driveway as he loaded his truck. I will call you when I get settled, he said. Do that, she said. She checked her watch. As he drove to the airport, Elias looked out the window at the suburban landscape passing by. He felt a cold certainty in his gut. He was stepping back to see the picture better. He just did not imagine what he was about to discover. Wyoming was brutal. The wind was a constant physical assault, cutting through layers of thermal clothing. Elias liked it. The work was exhausting, technical, and direct. Solving concrete problems with tools in his hands, and silence around him, was his safe zone. But the nights were dangerous. He lived in corporate housing. A small modular unit that smelled of pine cleaner and loneliness. There was no television. Only the internet. Social media became a silent trap. Elias was not a man who usually cared about digital footprints. But isolation breeds obsession. A teammate at the site mentioned seeing Sylvia in a post from a business summit in Seattle. Curious, Elias searched for the tag. He found it. In the first photo, she posed smiling, surrounded by 5 other executives, professional. Standard. In the second photo, the setting was different. It was a dimly lit lounge. Sylvia was sitting on a velvet sofa. Next to her, leaning in close, was Gideon. They were laughing at something between them, as if they were in their own private world. Gideon's hand was resting on the back of the sofa, inches from Sylvia's neck. In another image from the same night, posted by a different account, they were at a reserved table, their wine glasses were touching. The caption simply said, "Celebrating achievements and partnerships that transform reality." Elias looked at the screen until his eyes burned. That was his wife. Or at least, the woman who legally shared a life with him. Seeing the complicity between her and the high-performance coach exposed something he had already suspected, but hoped was paranoia. It was not just professional closeness. Something was crossing boundaries. The worst part was the silence. Sylvia did not mention Seattle. Her messages were brief. Robotic. Hope work is good. Paid the mortgage. Weather is nice here. Everything was automatic. The marriage had been archived without his knowledge. Elias sat in the dark of his modular unit. He felt the anger rising, displacing the sadness. He was being managed. She was handling him like a low-priority asset, while she invested her emotional capital elsewhere. He decided to cut the trip short. He told the site manager there was a family emergency. He organized his departure with cold efficiency. He did not tell Sylvia he was coming. The flight back felt endless. Elias spent the time reviewing everything. He went through bank statements he could access from his phone. He looked at credit card bills. He saw charges for dinners at restaurants he couldn't pronounce. Charges for consulting services, Vance Group LLC. The amounts were staggering. $5,000 a month. Sometimes 10. He was not just losing his wife. He was financing her exit strategy. He arrived at the house at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sylvia should have been at her office in the city. The driveway was empty. The house was silent. Elias entered. The air inside was stale, as if no one had really lived there for weeks. He went straight upstairs. He did not go to the bedroom. He went to the study. He opened the closet where they kept the safe. He knew the combination. It was the date of their wedding. He wondered if she had changed it. She hadn't. Inside, he found the blue folder. The life documents. He took it to the desk. He sat down and opened it. He sifted through deeds, insurance policies, and tax returns. Then, he found it. The marriage certificate. He almost passed it by. But he stopped. He unfolded the document. He read the fine print. Regime, total community of property. He stared at the clause. For years, he had trusted the marriage like one trusts gravity. He never thought about divorce. About protecting what was his, or dividing what was hers. He had always assumed they were a team. But now, that clause became the fulcrum of a lever he finally understood how to use. He did the math in his head. The $5 million from the recent commission. Sylvia's accumulated portfolio over the last decade, successful investments, bonuses, equity in the firm. The house. The retirement accounts. Elias knew the numbers roughly. Sylvia liked to brag about her net worth when she was feeling superior. Before the latest deal, she was sitting on roughly $8 million in liquid and illiquid assets. Add the $5 million. $13 million. And according to the piece of paper in his hand, none of that was exclusively hers. Legally, half of that wealth belonged to him. He closed the folder firmly. He put it in his backpack. He walked into the master bedroom. He opened her closet. He saw the new clothes. The designer bags that cost more than his truck. He felt a strange sense of clarity. He would not walk away from this as the victim. He would not be the sad husband left behind in the dust of her trajectory. He left the house without leaving a note. The next morning, Elias sat in the office of Regina Holt. Regina was a lawyer recommended by a union rep Elias knew. She was 60 years old, chain-smoked electronic cigarettes, and had eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human deceit. She listened to Elias without interrupting. She looked at the photos from Seattle. She looked at the bank statements showing the payments to Gideon Vance. She read the marriage certificate. "You have a very strong position, Mr. Thorne," Regina said, her voice raspy. "I do not want a long fight," Elias said. "I want what is fair." Regina tapped a fingernail on the photo of Gideon and Sylvia. "In this state, infidelity impacts the settlement if we can prove dissipation of marital assets on the affair. These payments to his LLC? That is dissipation. She is using community money to pay her boyfriend." "Boyfriend?" Elias asked. Hearing the word out loud made his stomach turn. "Let's call him what he is," Regina said. "Coach. Guru. Lover. It doesn't matter. He is the third party. And if we file, we name him." "Name him?" "Alienation of affection. Interference. We subpoena his records. We find out exactly what kind of coaching he was providing for $10,000 a month." Elias looked at the wall. He thought about Gideon's smug face. He thought about the book on the sideboard. Emotional sovereignty. "Do it," Elias said. "You understand what this means?" Regina asked. "We are asking for 50% of the total estate. $6,500,000. Plus legal fees." "She treated me like an employee she was planning to fire," Elias said coldly. "She sent me to Wyoming so she could play house with him." "Proceed." Regina drafted the papers that afternoon. Sylvia was served the papers 3 days later. At her office. In front of her colleagues. Elias was not there to see it. But he heard the aftermath. His phone rang that evening. It was Sylvia. He let it ring. It rang again. And again. He finally answered on the 4th attempt. "Elias?" Her voice was shaking. It was the first time in years he had heard her sound unsure. "Hello, Sylvia. What is this?" she demanded, trying to regain her composure. A process server walked into my boardroom. "Are you insane?" "I am just following the trajectory," Elias said. "Divorce? You want a divorce?" "I think the marriage ended a long time ago. I am just doing the paperwork." "But, half? You are demanding half of everything? The commission? My bonus?" "Our bonus," Elias corrected. "Community property. You did not earn that money," she screamed. The mask of the calm executive shattered. "I worked 18-hour days, I built this. And I maintained the home," Elias said. "I supported you. I moved my life around yours. And while I was in Wyoming working in the freezing cold, you were in Seattle drinking wine with your coach." Silence on the other end. Heavy, terrified silence. "You know about that," she whispered. "I know everything, Sylvia. The photos. The dinners. The consulting fees you paid him from our joint account. It's not what you think," she said quickly. "It's professional. We are close, yes, but—" "Save it for the deposition," Elias said. "My lawyer is subpoenaing Gideon's financial records next week. We are going to see exactly how much of our money went into his pocket." "You can't bring him into this," Sylvia said. Panic rising in her voice. "He is a public figure. His brand. If he is named in a messy divorce scandal, then tell him to write a chapter about it in his next book," Elias said. "Goodbye, Sylvia." He hung up. The collapse was faster than Elias expected. Sylvia knew that a public trial would be a disaster. Not just for her reputation in the conservative financial sector, but for Gideon. Dr. Gideon Vance sold a brand of ethical success. Of spiritual alignment. Being exposed as a man who slept with his married clients while billing their husbands would destroy his business model. 2 days after the call, Sylvia's lawyers contacted Regina Holt. They offered a settlement. $1 million. Regina laughed. And hung up. They called back an hour later. $2 million. My client is asking for what is rightfully his. Regina told them. $6.5 million. Or we see you in court. And Mr. Vance takes the stand. The pressure worked. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Elias heard through the grapevine that Gideon had cancelled a keynote speech in New York. His social media went silent. Sylvia was terrified. She realized that Elias was not the passive, tired man she had dismissed. He was a site manager. He knew how to withstand pressure. He knew how to wait. With no options left, she capitulated. She agreed to the full split. The house would be sold. The accounts liquidated. The assets divided down the middle. $6,500,000. For Elias. $6,500,000. For Sylvia. She had to sell off stock options she had wanted to hold. She had to liquidate the portfolio she was so proud of. The day the settlement was signed, they met in a conference room. Sylvia looked 10 years older. Her glow was gone. She looked tired, pale, and small. Gideon was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it that as soon as the threat of the lawsuit became real, he had distanced himself from her. A realignment of priorities, he probably called it. He had ghosted her to save his own skin. Sylvia signed the papers with a trembling hand. She didn't look at Elias. "I hope it was worth it," she muttered as she capped her pen. Elias took the document. He looked at her. Really looked at her. One last time. He saw the vanity. The insecurity. The desperate need for validation that Gideon had exploited. "It wasn't about the money, Sylvia," Elias said quietly. "It was about respect. You forgot that I was a person. You thought I was just furniture." He stood up. "You have your freedom now. You, and your money. Or what's left of it." He walked out of the room. He felt lighter than he had in years. Elias parked his truck in the driveway of a modest house in a small town in Oregon. It was raining. A soft, steady rhythm that he found soothing. He was no longer working on high-voltage lines. He had invested his share of the settlement wisely. He bought a small hardware franchise, and taught classes at a local trade school. He walked up the porch steps. The door opened before he could reach for his keys. A woman stood there. Her name was nothing like Sylvia. She was a schoolteacher. With laugh lines around her eyes, and paint on her hands. "You're late," she smiled. But it was a warm smile. A real one. "Traffic," Elias said. Kissing her forehead. Dada. A toddler, barely 2 years old, waddled down the hallway. She had Elias's eyes. Elias scooped his daughter up. She smelled of baby powder. And rain. He held her tight. This was his wealth. This was the asset that mattered. He rarely thought about Sylvia. He heard she had left the financial sector. After the divorce, and the quiet scandal of Gideon abandoning her, she had lost her edge. She was running a small consultancy now, something low profile. Elias didn't wish her harm. He didn't wish her anything at all. He carried his daughter into the kitchen, where dinner was cooking. It wasn't a fancy meal. It wasn't a $2 billion merger. It was spaghetti. And it was perfect. He sat down at the table. He was the main character in his life again. And for the first time, the story was a happy one. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.